Hi everyone, I am your host, Peter Zablocki, and you're listening to History Shorts. I hope everyone's having a great day so far, and thank you for making this show a small part of that. If you'd like to help me out with a small gesture, please leave History Shorts a rating or a review, and click that subscribe button if you haven't already done so. For sources and books used as the basis for these episodes, how to advertise on a show, and other information such as a list of our upcoming guests on the Conversation series, or a link to our Patreon account where you can listen to exclusive episodes not heard here, please visit www.historyshortspodcast.com. You could always shoot me an email at peter@historyshortspodcast.com. Today's episode is brought to you by the Podcast Republic, your ultimate podcast listening app. Discover and subscribe to thousands of podcasts from around the globe, all in one place. Download Podcast Republic now and take your podcast experience to the next level. Having said all of that, in the 6th century, the Roman Empire was but a memory in the West, its glories fragmented into barbarian kingdoms that rose from its ashes. Yet in Constantinople, where mosaics glittered beneath the domes of the Hagia Sophia and Roman law still held sway, one man refused to let that memory die. Emperor Justinian I, who came to power in 527 Common Era, dreamed of a Roman world made whole again. Where others saw decline, he saw unfinished work. And at the center of that imperial vision stood one prize above all others, the city of Rome itself. Here is the rest of that story.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Justinian's ambitions to reunite the Western and Eastern Roman empires, which had separated in 395 CE, was not necessarily just a dream. He possessed both the imperial will and the administrative machinery to make them real. His generals, most notably the brilliant and enigmatic Belisarius, were men of both cunning and courage. His state, though beleaguered by religious disputes and the massive cost of maintaining the eastern frontier against the Persians, still possessed the wealth of Egypt and the bureaucratic strength of a 1,000-year-old imperial tradition. Yet no amount of ambition could disguise the scale of what he was attempting. Rome in the mid-6th century was no longer the Rome of ancient times. It was under the control of the Ostrogoths, a Germanic people who had ruled Italy for decades under the guidance of Theodoric the Great and his successors. The Goths claimed to be defenders of Roman civilization, even as they had actually stripped the old senatorial class of power and reigned from Ravenna, not the eternal city of Rome. They were not barbarians in a wild sense, but neither were they Roman emperors. To Justinian, this was an intolerable fiction. Rome needed to be back with the Romans. The campaign to reclaim Italy, and with it Rome, began not in the shadow of the Colosseum but in North Africa. In 533 CE, Justinian dispatched Belisarius to attack the Vandal Kingdom, which had ruled Carthage and the former Roman provinces of Africa for nearly a century. In a stunning and swift campaign, Belisarius shattered the Vandal armies, reclaimed Carthage, and returned victorious, setting a precedent for swift reconquest. Excited by this success, Justinian turned his eyes northward toward Italy. In 535 CE, he gave Belisarius a new charge: invade the Italian Peninsula, overthrow the Gothic regime, and return Rome to imperial rule. Belisarius landed first in Sicily, and the conquest of the island proved surprisingly simple. The Gothic garrisons there were undermanned and demoralized. By 536, Belisarius crossed into southern Italy and advanced steadily north. Naples resisted, and a brutal siege ensued. After fierce fighting and a cunning infiltration of the aqueducts, the city finally fell, its defenders slaughtered. A grim warning to those who might oppose the imperial advance coming from Constantinople. Rome now stood next. The Eternal City had diminished in stature and population since the fall of the Western Empire in 476. And while Constantinople and the Eastern Empire continued to flourish, Rome not so much. Once home to 1 million souls, the Rome that Belisarius approached in late 536 housed perhaps 30,000 people. It was a ghost of its former self, haunted by the ruins of past greatness. Yet its symbolic power was immense. When the Gothic commander Witigis learned that Belisarius was approaching, he withdrew, ordering his garrison to retreat toward Ravenna. The city, left virtually undefended, welcomed Belisarius. And so, without a single sword raised in its defense, Rome returned to imperial hands for the first time in over 60 years. But the triumph was short-lived. By 537, Witigis had rallied the Gothic forces and descended upon Rome with a vast army, perhaps as many as 150,000 men, though some sources likely exaggerate the number. What is certain is that Belisarius, vastly outnumbered, found himself besieged in the very city he had just reclaimed. The Siege of Rome would become one of the defining episodes of the Gothic War, a brutal, year-long contest of attrition, deception, and heroism. The city's ancient walls, originally built by Emperor Aurelian in the 3rd century, were by now in poor repair, but Belisarius threw himself into fortification. He recruited citizens, repaired towers, blocked gates, and converted ruined temples into supply depots. The Goths cut the aqueducts, causing the watermills to stop and triggering a water shortage, but Belisarius responded with a marvel of improvisation. He had mills constructed on floating rafts in the Tiber River, allowing the city's bread supply to continue. As the siege dragged on, Gothic assaults repeatedly failed. The defenders, under Belisarius' brilliant tactical leadership, used superior discipline and Roman engineering to hold off wave after wave. Night raids, false retreats, and even flaming oil kept the Goths at bay. One chronicler, Procopius, who served with Belisarius, described how Gothic warriors were impaled on hidden spikes or fell to cunning traps set in the ruins of old Roman buildings. But the cost of this defense was steep. Starvation, disease, and morale sapped the strength of both sides. Rome suffered greatly. The city's churches turned into hospitals and morgues. The field around the city became graveyards. And yet, against all odds, Rome did not fall. Finally, in March of 538, after over a year, Witigis lifted the siege. The Goths withdrew, and Belisarius remained master of Rome, a stunning moral victory that echoed across Christendom. Justinian had not only reclaimed the city, he had proven that the Eastern Roman Empire still had the strength to match its legacy. But the war was far from over. The campaign to pacify the rest of Italy would grind on for years, devolving into a war of attrition. Belisarius pushed north, capturing cities and fortresses, but Gothic resistance remained stubborn. In 540, after several years of campaigning, he reached Ravenna, the Gothic capital. Witigis was cornered, his forces weakened. In a bizarre and dramatic twist, the Goths offered Belisarius the Western crown, hoping to turn him against Justinian. Belisarius, always loyal yet politically astute, pretended to accept, then seized Ravenna in Justinian's name. With Witigis captured, many believed the war was over. But Justinian, ever cautious and suspicious of his general's growing prestige, recalled Belisarius to Constantinople. Without him, the Italian front faltered. A new Gothic king, Totila, rose in 541 and launched a ferocious counteroffensive. Totila was no mere warlord. He was a charismatic and intelligent commander who sought not just to repel the Byzantines, but to restore Gothic rule with clemency and reform. Under Totila, Rome once again changed hands. In 546, the city fell after a renewed siege. Totila entered Rome and, in a shocking act of symbolic revenge, emptied the city. He allowed his men to sack the city, though he spared much of its population. The once proud city was now almost abandoned, a hollow shell. For a time, it looked as though Justinian's dream had turned to dust, and yet Justinian was not quite done. In 547, Belisarius was once again dispatched to Italy, his reputation still glowing despite his political enemies in court. He reoccupied Rome, rebuilt its defenses, and tried to rally imperial support, but now the emperor's resources were stretched thin. A terrible plague had swept through the empire starting in 541, the so-called Plague of Justinian, devastating Constantinople and draining the imperial treasury. Belisarius' pleas for reinforcements were largely ignored, and his second Italian campaign achieved little more than holding ground. It would fall to another general, Armenian-born eunuch Narses, to bring the war to its final conclusion. In 1552, Justinian entrusted him with a massive army of Lombards, heraldry, and imperial troops. At the Battle of Tagini, Narses defeated and killed Totila, breaking the back of Gothic resistance. In 554, Rome was definitely restored to imperial control, and Justinian issued the Pragmatic Sanction, declaring Italy officially a province of the Eastern Roman Empire. At long last, the dream was realized. The Western Empire, or at least its heart, was restored. Justinian now ruled over a reunited Mediterranean empire, from the Pillars of Hercules to the shores of Syria, but the victory came at a terrible cost. The Gothic War, which lasted nearly 2 decades, devastated Italy. Cities were sacked, populations displaced, agriculture ruined. Rome itself was besieged multiple times, its aqueducts destroyed, its temples and monuments looted. The very act of reconquest had crippled the land Justinian sought to restore. What had once been a flourishing peninsula became a broken battleground. Even more tragically, the gains would not last. Within a generation of Justinian's death in 565, much of Italy would fall again, this time to the Lombards, who invaded in 568 and carved out new kingdoms. The dream of a restored Roman world was once again fractured. Ultimately, Justinian's campaign to recapture Rome left a legacy that could not be erased. It demonstrated that the Roman idea, the dream of unity, law, and imperial glory, still held power, even in a shattered world. Thanks for listening.